President Trump's policy plans, tax reform a priority, and corporate America has high hopes on lower rates. But it appears changes are getting pushed to the back burner. Joining us right now is Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist. Grover, it is good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. Markets have been rallying on the idea that taxes are coming down. How big of a risk is this if Congress is, in fact, taking tax reform from the front to the back burner?
Well, I think one of the key things to point out is whether they pass it in August or September of this year, it will take effect. The lower corporate rate, they're looking to take the rate to 20%, would take place for the entire year. I wish both the president and the congressional leadership would make that clearer and louder. When I talk to people, they say, oh, yeah, when we cut the corporate rate, it's for the whole year. It's for your whole year. So starting in January, we'd have the lower rate. And the same thing for full business expensing, immediate business expensing. We need to make it clear to businesses that that takes effect now. There's some consensus issues in tax reform, lower rate to 20%, full business expensing. There are other issues that are not consensus issues that are agreed to, but we should be clear that the first two will happen, and then we'll work on the rest of it.
So what you're saying is we could see the legislation implemented later in the year, September even, but you're hopeful that it will be retroactive to January 1, and you think that's okay. But let me ask you about where there isn't agreement, and that, of course, is the border tax plan.
Yes.
The border adjustment tax, give us your plain English analysis as far as what this would mean for the economy and how companies would react, because we've got this report that basically goes through cars. There was a report from Bloomberg that says Jaguar Land Rover would take the biggest hit. It would need to raise prices by more than $17,000 a vehicle for Land Rover to recoup the higher costs associated with that proposed adjusted tax. Ford would only need to raise the price of its Ford vehicles about $282 in the face of that. So give us your sense of what this border adjustment tax means for consumers.
Right. Well, the border adjustment tax taxes imports, puts the corporate income tax on imports the way Europeans do with value-added tax, and then exempts them when you export. It gives an advantage to exporters, and it puts a tax on importers. It has a challenge, and that is all tariffs, all border taxes are taxes on American consumers. I know sometimes political leaders like to make it sound as if foreigners paid tariffs or taxes at the border, but they don't. American consumers do. It is a piece of a broader tax reform package that is overall tremendously pro-growth. If there was another way to find the $1 trillion over a decade that they're looking for, like spending restraint or entitlement reform, that would be much stronger for the economy.
But, Grover, politically, if there's going to be a tax policy change like the addition of a border adjustment tax, and it adds to the cost that consumers pay on, say, automobiles, it's going to be portrayed by opponents, Democrats, as a tax increase. And that's a major headwind if you want to push this through Congress, right? Well,
the overall package is a dramatic multi-trillion-dollar reduction in the tax burden on Americans and is very pro-growth. The piece of it we're talking about, the border adjustable piece, in itself will, at least in the short term, raise revenue. Over time, less so. But the other challenge you have is that, or the advantage rather, if we're at a 20% corporate rate and the president said he wanted to go to 15, if we keep driving that corporate rate down, it becomes less damaging to have it be border adjustable in terms of consumer.
Right.
Grover, Mike Block here. What about mortgage interest deductibility and the carried interest tax for private equity type funds? Is that part in the cards as well for this administration? Is that something that should be, if not?
Both are being discussed. Trump said he wanted to tax carried interest. I'm concerned about anything that limits capital gains taxes. The left has always wanted to get rid of the distinction between capital gains taxes, which is the second tax on a dollar, and ordinary income. Carried interest, the move there, does that. It moves to ordinary income instead of capital gains. That makes me uncomfortable. It's not, in terms of the long-term trend, it's not that much money. It is a signal that some politicians like say, see, I told those hedge fund guys this wasn't about them. My preference is and my hope is that they will not be raising taxes and turning capital gains into ordinary income and therefore raise the price. On the deductibility of mortgage interest, there may be some caps on that. Right now, if that's your interest, I'd get in and start talking to your congressman and senator. But average citizens will not see any change.
All right, Tony, go ahead.
Grover, good to see you. Tony Saig here. Two-part question for you. Number one, you have the individual rates, you have the corporate rates, and then you have overall tax reform. Are these best done collectively through the legislative process or individually, number one? Number two, are we going to get Democrats on board? You have 10 red state, quote-unquote, Democrats up in 2018 who probably would be very well suited to cooperate on passage of these types of reforms. What do you think?
First part first. There may be some Democrat votes for the final package. There will not be Democrat participation in drafting it because there will not be 8 votes. Unless you have 8 Democrat votes, which allows you to pass it with 60 votes and do it outside of reconciliation, there's no point in negotiating for less strong tax reform in return for 3 Democrat votes or 5 Democrat votes or 7 Democrat votes. 7 Democrat votes are worth nothing. 8 would allow you to pass it outside of reconciliation. But unless you have 8, you might as well have none. Why move to the left and have a lousier tax plan in order to make some Democrat running in a red state look like they're pretending to be pro-taxpayer? It just gets them off the hook.
That's good. Let me ask you, Grover, we've got some followers on Twitter who want to ask, really they want to ask Leader Kevin McCarthy, who's coming up in the program, what specific tax moves will actually move the needle on economic growth? This is from John Ferris, and he's basically saying, what specific tax reforms or cuts would generate real growth? What's most important to you as we look ahead to Kevin McCarthy coming on the program this morning? What do you want to make sure is in that package? Because it's going to lead to growth.
Absolutely. Taking the corporate rate from 35% down to at least 20% with the goal of getting it to 15%, letting the world know that that's where we are would be a tremendous driver of growth. The other is going to full and immediate business expensing rather than long depreciation schedules. Those 2 things dramatically reduce the cost of capital, reduce the cost of investment, and would make the United States a much better place to invest in and create jobs.
All right, we will leave it there. Grover, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Maria, thank you.
We'll see you soon. Grover Norquist joining us there.